Eddie Van Halen was in the middle of recording his new album when a FedEx package arrived with "Urgent, please watch" written in red marker. Inside was a VHS tape. What Eddie saw on that tape made him walk out of the most expensive recording session of his career and book the next flight to Ohio. It was March 1992, and Eddie was at 5150 Studios in Los Angeles, working on what would become one of Van Halen's most important albums. The session was costing $15,000 per day, and some of the best session musicians in the world were waiting for Eddie to lay down his guitar tracks. But when that FedEx package arrived at 2:47 p.m., everything stopped. Eddie's assistant brought the package into the control room. It was covered in stamps marked "Rush Delivery," and the handwriting on the label was shaky, almost desperate. Eddie almost ignored it. He received hundreds of fan packages every week. But something about those red marker words made him pause. "Give me 5 minutes," Eddie told the producer, and he took the package to his private lounge. Inside was a VHS tape, a handwritten letter on lined notebook paper, and a small photograph of a young boy with dark hair and distant eyes. Eddie picked up the letter first. It was dated March 8, 1992, and it began, "Mr. Van Halen, I am writing to you because you are my last hope. My son Tommy has never spoken a word in his 8 years of life, but 3 weeks ago, something impossible happened." Eddie kept reading, and with each sentence, his heart beat faster. The letter was from Linda Chen, a single mother from Dayton, Ohio. She explained that her son Tommy had been diagnosed with severe autism at age 2. Doctors told her he would likely never speak, never connect with other people, never live independently. For 6 years, Linda had tried everything: speech therapy, occupational therapy, special schools, experimental treatments. Nothing worked. Tommy lived in his own silent world, barely acknowledging anyone around him, including his own mother. But on February 14, 1992, Valentine's Day, something changed. Linda had been cleaning out her garage and found her late husband's old guitar. Her husband Michael had died in a car accident when Tommy was just 9 months old. The guitar had been sitting in its case for 7 years, untouched. Linda brought it inside, thinking she might sell it to help pay for Tommy's therapies. She left the guitar case in the living room and went to make lunch. When she came back 15 minutes later, Tommy was sitting on the floor with the guitar in his lap. His small fingers were on the strings, and he was perfectly still, just staring at the instrument. Linda watched from the doorway, afraid to move or speak and break whatever spell had taken hold of her son. Then Tommy's fingers moved, not randomly, not clumsily, but with purpose and precision. What came out of that guitar made Linda drop the plate she was holding. Tommy was playing Eddie Van Halen's Eruption, note for note, perfectly. This was impossible. Tommy had never touched a guitar before. He'd never shown interest in music. He couldn't even speak. Yet here he was, playing one of the most technically difficult guitar solos ever recorded, a piece that professional guitarists spent years trying to master. Linda stood frozen in the doorway, watching her silent son play music that seemed to come from somewhere beyond this world. When Tommy finished the solo, he gently set the guitar down and returned to staring at his hands, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Linda called Tommy's therapist immediately. The therapist came to the house the next day with a video camera. They set up the camera and asked Tommy to play again. Without hesitation, without even looking at them, Tommy picked up the guitar and played Eruption again, perfectly identical to the first time. The therapist was speechless. In 15 years of working with autistic children, she'd never seen anything like this. She suggested Linda contact Eddie Van Halen directly. "If anyone needs to see this," she said, "it's him." Eddie finished reading the letter and picked up the VHS tape. His hands were shaking slightly as he pushed it into the VCR. The video quality was poor, clearly shot on a home camera, but what Eddie saw made him forget to breathe. On the screen was a small boy sitting cross-legged on a carpeted floor, holding a beat-up acoustic guitar that was almost too big for him. His eyes weren't looking at the camera or at the guitar. They seemed to be looking at nothing and everything at once. Then, the boy's fingers touched the strings. Eddie had heard thousands of guitarists play Eruption over the years. Most of them got it technically correct, but missed the soul of it, the feeling that Eddie had poured into that solo when he recorded it in 1978. But this 8-year-old boy who had never spoken a word was playing it exactly as Eddie had felt it. Every bend, every hammer on, every harmonic perfect, not just in technique, but in emotion. Eddie watched the entire 3-minute performance without moving. When it ended, he rewound the tape and watched it again, and again, and again. On the 4th viewing, Eddie noticed something that made his blood run cold. At the 2-minute mark, right when the solo reaches its most technically challenging section, a single tear rolled down the boy's cheek. But his fingers never stopped moving, never missed a note. It was as if the music was speaking for him, expressing everything he couldn't say with words. Eddie stood up and walked back into the control room. The producer looked up expectantly. "Ready to lay down that track?" "Cancel everything," Eddie said quietly. "What?" "Eddie, we've got the studio booked for 3 more days. We've got session guys waiting. We've got—" "I said cancel it," Eddie interrupted, his voice firmer now. "Cancel all of it. I need to go to Ohio." "Ohio? Eddie, what are you talking about? We're in the middle of recording an album." Eddie looked at the producer with an intensity that made the man take a step back. "There's a kid who needs me. That's more important than any album." Within 2 hours, Eddie had booked a flight to Dayton. He didn't tell his manager, didn't tell his bandmates, didn't tell anyone except his assistant where he was going. He just took the VHS tape, the letter, and a small guitar case containing one of his custom-made guitars. And he left. The flight to Dayton felt like the longest of Eddie's life. He watched the VHS tape on his portable player 3 more times, studying every detail of the boy's performance. Eddie had built his entire career on pushing the boundaries of what was possible on the guitar, but what this child was doing transcended anything he'd ever seen. When the plane landed at Dayton International Airport at 11 p.m., Eddie rented a car and drove straight to the address on the letter. It was a small house in a modest neighborhood. The lights were still on inside. Eddie sat in the rental car for 10 minutes, suddenly nervous. What was he doing here? What could he possibly offer this family? He was a rock star, not a therapist or a doctor, but then he remembered that tear on the boy's cheek as he played, and Eddie knew he had to at least try. He walked up to the front door and knocked. Linda Chen opened the door, saw Eddie Van Halen standing on her porch at nearly midnight, and her legs almost gave out. "Oh my God," she whispered, "you came. You actually came." "May I meet him?" Eddie asked simply. Linda nodded, too overwhelmed to speak, and led Eddie inside. The house was small but clean, filled with toys that looked like they'd never been played with, and therapeutic equipment that told the story of years of struggle. Tommy was sitting in the living room, in the exact same spot where he'd been in the video, holding the same guitar. He didn't look up when Eddie entered. He didn't seem to notice a stranger had entered his home. Eddie sat down on the floor about 6 feet away from Tommy, setting his guitar case beside him. He didn't try to make eye contact or speak. He just sat there, patient and still. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes, Tommy's fingers moved to the guitar strings. Without any prompting, without any acknowledgement that anyone else was in the room, he began to play Eruption again. Eddie listened with tears streaming down his face. This wasn't just a boy playing his music. This was a boy using his music as a lifeline to connect with a world that had been unreachable to him. When Tommy finished, Eddie slowly opened his guitar case and pulled out his custom-made Frankenstrat guitar, the same one he'd used to record Eruption 14 years earlier, the guitar that had become iconic in rock history. Eddie began playing a simplified version of Eruption, deliberately making small mistakes, playing it slower than normal. He was offering Tommy an invitation, a chance to teach him, to correct him. And Tommy responded. For the first time in 8 years, Tommy looked directly at another human being. He looked at Eddie, and their eyes met. Then Tommy reached over and gently touched Eddie's fingers, guiding them to the correct position on the fretboard. Linda gasped from the doorway. Tommy had never initiated physical contact with anyone before. Eddie and Tommy played together for the next 3 hours, trading solos, with Eddie gradually introducing variations and new techniques, and Tommy following along perfectly, adding his own touches. They communicated entirely through music, building a conversation without words. At around 3 a.m., Eddie played the opening notes to Love Me Tender, not a Van Halen song, but the old Elvis Presley ballad. It was slower, gentler, more emotionally direct. Tommy put down his guitar and did something that made time stop. He opened his mouth and sang, "Love me tender, love me sweet." His voice was rough from 8 years of not being used, but the words were clear. The words were real. Linda collapsed to her knees, sobbing. 8 years. 8 years of silence, broken in a single moment. Tommy looked at his mother, then at Eddie, and spoke his first sentence. "The music tells me what to say." Eddie pulled Tommy into a hug, and the boy didn't pull away. He hugged back. Over the next 2 days, Eddie stayed in Dayton. He worked with Tommy for hours each day, using music as a bridge. Tommy's speech wasn't perfect. He was still clearly autistic, still had challenges, but he could communicate now. He could express what he was feeling, and he did it through a combination of words and music. Eddie arranged for Tommy to receive specialized music therapy from the best professionals in the country. He set up a trust fund to cover all of Tommy's medical and educational expenses, and he invited Tommy and Linda to visit him in Los Angeles once a month, where they would have private music sessions. But more importantly, Eddie learned something from Tommy that changed his entire approach to music and life. Music wasn't just entertainment. It wasn't just about technical skill or fame. Music was a language that could reach people in places that words never could. It could unlock parts of the human soul that were trapped behind walls of silence. The album that Eddie had been recording, the one he'd walked away from to fly to Ohio, was eventually completed 6 months later. But it was different now. Eddie played with a new purpose, a new understanding of why his music mattered. In the liner notes of that album, Eddie wrote, "This album is dedicated to Tommy Chen, who taught me that music isn't something we create. It's something we discover inside ourselves and share with the world. Tommy found his voice through my guitar, and in doing so, he gave me back my own." Tommy continued to progress with music therapy. By age 12, he was performing in small venues, playing not just guitar but also piano and drums. By 16, he was composing his own music, complex pieces that blended classical technique with rock innovation. But he never forgot that night when Eddie Van Halen sat on his living room floor and spoke to him in the only language he could understand. In 2020, when Eddie Van Halen passed away after his long battle with cancer, Tommy, now 36 years old and a successful music therapist himself, played Eruption at Eddie's memorial service. And in the middle of that legendary solo, he added something new. A variation that Eddie had taught him that first night, a secret musical phrase that only the two of them had ever shared. As Tommy played that phrase, everyone who knew the story understood. It was Tommy's way of saying goodbye, of saying thank you, of saying I love you in the language that Eddie had taught him, was the most powerful of all. The story of Eddie and Tommy reminds us that genius isn't just about technical skill or fame. Real genius is recognizing when something matters more than your career, more than your schedule, more than your plans. It's having the courage to walk away from a $15,000 per day recording session because a child you've never met needs you. Eddie Van Halen didn't cure Tommy's autism. He didn't perform a miracle. What he did was simpler and somehow more profound. He listened. He showed up. He sat on a floor at midnight and spoke in the language that a silent boy could understand. And in doing so, Eddie proved that music isn't just sound waves and technical precision. It's connection. It's communication. It's love made audible. Tommy Chen speaks now, but he says that music will always be his first language. And whenever someone asks him why, he tells them about the night a rock legend walked away from everything to sit on a living room floor and play guitar with a boy who lived in silence. That night, two people who seemed to exist in completely different worlds found out they'd been speaking the same language all along. If this incredible story of music's power to heal and connect moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that the most important thing we can do is show up for each other. Have you ever experienced a moment where music helped you communicate something words couldn't express? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the legends who reminded us what really matters.